The weather alert had been screaming red for 3 days straight. David Kane ignored it like he ignored most things from the outside world. His cabin sat at 9,000 feet in the Colorado Rockies, surrounded by pine forests and silence, exactly how he liked it. The nearest town was 40 miles down a winding mountain road that became impassable 6 months out of the year. He'd bought this place 4 years ago with his military discharge pay, looking for somewhere to forget. Forget the screaming, the blood, the faces of soldiers he couldn't save. As a combat medic in 3 different war zones, David had seen enough suffering to last several lifetimes. The mountains offered something the world below couldn't: peace. But tonight, peace was drowning in the worst blizzard the region had seen in 30 years. David stood at his window, watching snow fall so thick it looked like television static. The wind howled like something alive and angry, shaking the reinforced walls of his cabin. He'd already brought in extra firewood, checked his generator, and secured the storm shutters. Years of military discipline meant he was always prepared. He was pouring his third coffee when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm, sharp, mechanical, like metal grinding against rock. Then nothing, just wind and snow. David set down his mug and listened. 30 seconds passed, a minute. He was about to dismiss it when he heard something else, a cry. Faint, almost swallowed by the storm, but definitely human, or at least humanoid. He grabbed his heavy coat, pulled on insulated boots, and took his flashlight and medical bag. Old habits died hard. The cold hit him like a physical blow when he opened the door. -15 degrees, probably worse with wind chill. Nobody should be out in this. The cry came again, weaker this time, from the direction of the access road. David pushed through knee-deep snow, his flashlight beam barely penetrating the white chaos. 50 yards from his cabin, he found the wreckage. An aircraft, if you could call it that. The design was like nothing he'd seen in his military service. Smooth, organic curves instead of hard angles. The hull was a dark, opalescent material that shimmered even in the flashlight's harsh beam. It had carved a trench through the snow and now rested against a cluster of boulders, one wing crumpled, smoke rising from the rear. "Hello?" David shouted over the wind. "Anyone alive?" Movement near the wreckage. 2 figures huddled together against the aircraft's less damaged side. David rushed forward and his breath caught. They weren't human. 2 women, at least they appeared female, with skin that glowed with a faint silvery luminescence even through the coating of snow. Their features were delicate, almost ethereal, large eyes that reflected his flashlight like a cat's, high cheekbones, and flowing hair that seemed to move independently of the wind. They wore thin, metallic garments, completely inadequate for the cold. Both were shaking violently. The smaller one's lips had turned blue, or what passed for blue on her silver-toned skin. The taller one had her arms wrapped around her companion, trying to shield her from the wind. David's medic training overrode his shock. Hypothermia, advanced stage, minutes away from critical. "Can you understand me?" he shouted. The taller one's eyes focused on him with obvious effort. "Please." Her voice was musical, harmonized like 2 tones at once. "Kira, sister, dying." That was all David needed to hear. He shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around the smaller one, Kira, then pulled both women to their feet. They were lighter than they should be, as if their bones were hollow. The taller one collapsed immediately, her legs giving out. No time for gentle. David hoisted Kira over his shoulder in a fireman's carry, then grabs the other woman's arm and pulled her upright. "Walk, you have to walk or you'll die here." Somehow, they made it back to the cabin. David kicked the door open and dragged them inside, immediately laying them near the fireplace. He cranked the heat and added more logs to the fire, then started stripping off their inadequate clothing. "Sorry, but these need to come off. Wet clothing will kill you faster than cold air." Neither woman protested. They were beyond modesty, beyond anything except the primal need for warmth. David wrapped them in every blanket he owned, then went to work. Years of combat medicine kicked in. Check airways, clear. Pulses, rapid and thready but present. Respiration, shallow. Core temperature, he didn't need a thermometer to know it was dangerously low. He filled hot water bottles from his kettle and placed them against their necks, armpits, and groins, the key areas for warming. Forced them to drink warm, sweetened water in small sips. The taller one kept her eyes on him the whole time, watching every movement with an intensity that was almost unnerving. "My name is David," he said as he worked. "David Kane. I'm a medic, a healer. Understand?" She nodded weakly. "Lyra," she whispered, touching her chest. Then she gestured to the smaller one. "Kira, my sister." "Okay, Lyra, your sister is in bad shape, but I can help. Just stay awake, both of you. Don't sleep yet." Over the next 2 hours, David fought to bring them back from the edge. He monitored their temperatures, adjusted their position relative to the fire, kept forcing warm fluids down their throats. Gradually, color returned to their strange, luminescent skin. Their shaking decreased from violent tremors to occasional shivers. Kira was the first to fully regain consciousness. Her eyes, a striking violet that seems to shift in the firelight, opened and focused on David with startling clarity. "You saved us," she said in that same harmonized voice. Her English was better than her sister's, though accented with sounds no human throat could make. "Just doing what anyone would do," David replied, checking her pulse. "Stronger now. Good." "No." Kira sat up slowly, keeping the blankets wrapped around her. "Not anyone. We've learned that about this world. Most would have let us die. Or worse." There was a story there, David could tell. A dark one. Lyra sat up as well, moving to her sister's side with obvious protectiveness. Now that they were out of immediate danger, David got his good look at them. They were beautiful in an otherworldly way that made his chest ache. Beyond the luminescent skin and usual eyes, there was something in the way they moved, fluid, graceful, as if gravity affected them differently. But there were other things too. Scars, thin, precise lines across their forearms and necks, the kind of scars that spoke of medical procedures, not accidents. And at the base of each of their spines, a small, dark device embedded under the skin, implants of some kind. "Where are you from?" David asked, settling into his chair across from them. "And what were you running from in weather like this?" The sisters exchanged a look, one of those wordless communications that siblings perfected over years together. "We are Lunari," Lyra said finally, "from a world you would call Titan, one of your Saturn's moons. But we were not there. We were—" She struggled for the word. "Prisoners," Kira finished, her voice hard. "For 3 years, in a place underground. They called it a research facility, but it was a cage." David felt anger kindle in his gut. "Who held you prisoner?" "Humans," Kira said flatly. "A corporation. They took us when our diplomatic shuttle landed in your Pacific Ocean, said we were unregistered aliens and potential biological threats. Then they made us disappear." "They studied us," Lyra continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Cut us, tested us, took samples. We were not people to them, just specimens." David's hands clenched into fists. He'd seen too much cruelty in his military service, but this cut differently. These women had come in peace and been answered with torture. "The tracking devices," he said, gesturing to the implants on their spines. "They'll use those to find you." Both sisters nodded grimly. "Can you remove them?" Kira asked. "We tried, but they are buried too deep. We do not have the tools." David stood and retrieved his medical kit, not the basic first aid supplies, but the advanced field surgery equipment he'd kept from his service days. Technically illegal for a civilian to possess, but he'd never been good at following rules that didn't make sense. "I can do it," he said, "but it's going to hurt, and you'll have to stay absolutely still. The devices are near your spinal column. One wrong move and I could paralyze you." "We trust you," Lyra said simply. Those 3 words carried a weight that made David pause. These women had been betrayed by his species, tortured and experimented on, yet they were willing to trust him with their lives based on nothing more than the fact that he'd pulled them from the snow. He spent the next hour performing the most delicate surgery of his life. The implants were sophisticated, military-grade tracking devices with built-in vitals monitors and, disturbingly, what looked like shock delivery systems. control collars disguised as medical monitors. When he finally extracted the second device from Kira's spine, both women sagged with relief so profound it was almost palpable. "They cannot find us now," Kira said, tears streaming down her glowing cheeks. "They'll know your last location," David warned, "and when they arrive and find these devices but no bodies, they'll search the area." "Then we should leave," Lyra said, starting to stand. "In this storm?" David had his head. "You'd die before you made it a mile." "No, you stay here. We prepare. I've got supplies, defensible positions, and enough military experience to make anyone who comes looking think twice." "Why?" Kira asked, staring at him with those impossibly violet eyes. "Why would you risk yourself for us?" David was quiet for a moment, thinking about all the people he couldn't save, all the faces that haunted his dreams. "Because someone should. Because it's right. And because I'm tired of good people suffering while bad people walk free." Lyra moved closer, reaching out to touch his face with cool, glowing fingers. The gesture was intimate, but somehow innocent. "On our world, there is a word, Salketh. It means one who stands between darkness and the innocent. It is the highest honor we can bestow." "I'm just a man doing the right thing," David said, uncomfortable with the reverence in her voice. "No," Kira said, moving to her sister's side. "You are Salketh, and by our people's oldest laws, we are bonded to you by debt of life. What you did tonight, saving us when you could have turned away, it creates a secret obligation." "I don't want anything from you," David said quickly. "You don't owe me." The sisters smiled at each other, then back at him. "It is not about want," Lyra explained. "It is about what is. You are Salketh, and we are bonded. This is the beginning, David Kane, not the end." Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the cabin, something warmer than fire had been kindled, a connection that transcended species, language, and worlds. David didn't fully understand it yet, but he could feel it settling into his bones like certainty. He looked at the two alien women wrapped in his blankets, their skin glowing softly in the firelight, and realized that his life of isolation was over. Whether he'd wanted it or not, he'd just become responsible for two lives that depended on him. And somewhere in the howling dark, people who saw these women as property were already plotting to take them back. David checked his rifle, counted his ammunition, and began planning. He'd lost too many people in his life. He wasn't going to lose two more. The storm outside was just beginning, the real battle yet to come. The blizzard lasted 3 more days. During that time, David's cabin became a world unto itself, a small pocket of warmth and light surrounded by white chaos. And in that enclosed space, walls came down in more ways than one. Lyra and Kira recovered quickly, their alien physiology proving remarkably resilient once the immediate threat of hypothermia passed. By the second morning, they were moving around the cabin with increasing confidence, though they never strayed far from the fireplace. Despite being from Titan, a frozen moon, they explained that their bodies were adopted to controlled cold environments, not the violent, wet cold of Earth's winter storms. "Our world is cold, yes," Kira explained, curled up in an armchair with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "But it is a still cold, predictable. Your planet's weather is aggressive." David was at the kitchen counter preparing breakfast. Eggs, bacon, toast. Simple food, but the sisters watched him cook with fascination. "On Titan, we do not prepare food this way," Lyra said, leaning forward. "Our nourishment is synthesized, precise nutrients, exact proportions. This," she gestured at the sizzling pan, "this is art." "It's just breakfast," David said with a slight smile, but he felt oddly pleased by her observation. When he served them, both sisters approached the meal with careful curiosity. Kira took a small bite of scrambled eggs, and her eyes widened in surprise. "It has texture, temperature variation, complexity." She took another bite, then another, her movements becoming less tentative. "This is wonderful." Watching them eat with such genuine pleasure made David realize how much he'd taken for granted. He'd been cooking for himself for years, barely tasting his food, eating for survival rather than enjoyment. Seeing it through their eyes reminded him that even simple things could be extraordinary from the right perspective. After breakfast, David began teaching them practical survival skills: how to add wood to the fire safely, how to use the manual well pump if the power failed, how to read the weather instruments. The sisters absorbed everything with intense focus, asking thoughtful questions and practicing each task until they had it perfect. "You were military," Lyra observed while David was showing her how to properly maintain the wood stove. It wasn't a question. "Marine Corps, combat medic, 3 chores. And you left because—" David was quiet for a moment, feeding a log into the stove. "Because I couldn't save everyone, and eventually that broke something in me. I needed to get away from it all, the war, the noise, the constant reminder of my failures." Kira, who had been listening from across the room, spoke softly. "We understand failure. We failed to escape twice before. Others helped us, Lunari sympathizers who infiltrated the facility. Both times we were recaptured. Both times our helpers were punished. Some were killed." David turned to face them fully. "Tell me about this facility, everything you can remember. If they're coming for you, I need to know what we're up against." Over the next hours, the sisters painted a disturbing picture. The corporation that held them, Helios Biotech, operated several black sites dedicated to xenobiological research. The facility where they'd been held was somewhere in Nevada, buried deep underground. Security was extensive: armed guards, biometric locks, surveillance systems, and fail-safes designed to prevent exactly what the sisters had accomplished. "We were the only Lunari they held," Lyra said, her voice distant with memory. "But there were others: a Centaurian navigator, 2 Andromedan merchants, even a Tau Cetian child who'd been separated from their colony ship. All of us were unregistered," bitterly, Kira added, "as if needing permission to exist on Earth made it acceptable to treat us as laboratory animals." "How did you finally escape?" asked David. The sisters exchanged another of their wordless looks. Finally, Kira spoke. "There was a guard, human but different. She saw us as people. Her name was Sarah Chen. She worked there for 6 months, gaining trust, learning systems. Then one night, she triggered a facility-wide power failure and released us. She gave us the shuttle, programmed with coordinates to the Canadian wilderness, where she said there were underground networks that helped aliens escape. We never made it," Lyra continued. "The storm was worse than predicted. Our shuttle, designed for space, not atmospheric flight in extreme weather, lost power. We crashed here instead." "And Sarah?" asked David, though he already suspected the answer. "They found her 10 minutes after we launched," Kira whispered. "The last transmission she sent us was her screaming." The cabin fell silent except for the crackling fire. David felt the familiar weight of survivor's guilt settle over him, a weight that you knew the sisters felt too. Someone had to die so they could live. That kind of debt never went away. You just learned to carry it. "She didn't die for nothing," David said firmly. "You're alive. You're free. Make that mean something." "We intend to," Lyra said, her voice carrying a steel David hadn't heard before. "Once we reach our people, we will expose Helios Biotech. We will see justice done." "First, you have to survive long enough to reach your people," David pointed out, "and that means preparing for company. They'll come as soon as the storm clears." That night, while the sisters slept, David did what he did best. He planned. He sketched out defensive positions, identified fallback points, checked his weapons and ammunition. He had his service rifle, a shotgun, 2 handguns, and enough ammunition to hold off a small force. Not an army, but enough to make attackers think twice. What concerned him more was the idea of collateral damage. If Helios sent a team, they'd be professionals, mercenaries probably, with rules of engagement that prioritized retrieval over restraint. They wouldn't care about property damage or civilian casualties. David's cabin could become a war zone. He was so focused on his planning that he didn't hear Lyra approach until she spoke. "You should rest, David. You've barely slept since we arrived." He looked up to find her standing in the doorway, wrapped in one of his spare blankets. Her skin's natural luminescence provided a soft, silvery light that made her look almost ghostly. I can't sleep. Too much to think about. Lyra moved closer, settling into the chair across from his planning table. On Lunari, we have a saying, "The protector who never rests protects no one, for he is already fallen." Poetic, David said with a slight smile, but I'll rest when I know you're both safe. Why? Lyra asked suddenly, her violet eyes intense. Why'd you care so much? You don't know us. We're not even your species. You owe us nothing, yet you risk everything. David set down his pencil. It was a fair question, one he'd been asking himself. When I was in Afghanistan, he began slowly, there was a village near our forward operating base. Good people, just trying to survive in a war zone. One day, insurgents attacked them because the village elder had been talking to us. By the time we got there, he paused, the memories still sharp after all these years. We were too late. Women, children, elderly, all dead. I couldn't save any of them. He met Lyra's gaze. I swore then that if I ever got another chance to stand between evil and innocent people, I wouldn't hesitate. I wouldn't be too late. So when I found you and Kira in the snow dying, I didn't see aliens or strangers. I saw people who needed help. And this time, I could actually do something. Lyra was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood and moved around the table, surprising David by kneeling in front of him. She took both his hands in hers, her skin cool but not cold, smooth and faintly glowing. On Lunari, when someone saves a life, we say they hold a piece of that person's soul, she said softly. You hold pieces of both Kira's soul and mine. That creates a bond deeper than friendship, stronger than gratitude. It is called Kelsha, the binding of spirits. I don't understand, David said, though his heart was beating faster. In our culture, when a Salketh, a protector, saves bonded sisters, those sisters may offer themselves as life companions, not as payment or obligation, but as recognition of a truth, that souls meant to be together have found each other. David's breath caught. Lyra, what are you saying? She squeezed his hands gently. I am saying that Kira and I have discussed this. We wish to formally request Kelsha bond with you. In your culture, you might call it marriage, though it is more than that. It is a joining of lives, of purposes, of futures. Both of you, David asked, his voice strained. That's not how things work on Earth. One person, one partner. But we are not of Earth, Lyra said with a small smile, and Lunari royal families have bonded in triads for thousands of years. It is our way. Royal? David's eyes widened. Your royalty. Lyra's expression turned rueful. I suppose we should have mentioned that. Kira and I are daughters of the Lunari High Council. Not quite princesses, but close enough. Our diplomatic mission to Earth was meant to establish formal relations between our peoples. Instead, we were kidnapped, and our disappearance nearly caused an interstellar incident. David stood abruptly, pulling his hands free. You should have told me. This changes everything. If you're that important, Helios won't just send a retrieval team. They'll send an army to either get you back or make sure you never talk. All the more reason to accept our bond, Kira said from the doorway. David turned to find her awake as well, watching them both. With Kelsha, you become family. Our people would be obligated to protect you as they protect us. You would have the full resources of the Lunari Council behind you. I don't want protection, David said. I want you both safe, and dragging me into some interspecies political mess isn't... He stopped as Kira suddenly gasped, her hand going to her chest. Her skin, which had been glowing steadily, began to flicker erratically. Kira! Lyra rushed to her sister's side as Kira collapsed. David was right behind her, his medic training taking over. What's happening? He demanded, checking her pulse. It was racing, irregular. The experiments, Lyra said, her voice tight with fear. They injected us with something. They said it was to stabilize our biology for Earth's environment, but sometimes Kira has reactions. Her body tries to reject it. Kira was convulsing now, her skin's luminescence going from silvery to a sickly green. David had seen enough allergic reactions to know this was bad, potentially fatal. "What do you normally do?" he asked, already calculating treatments. "We had medication, synthesized on Lunari, but it was in the shuttle and the shuttle's buried in snow. Damn it." He ran to his medical supplies, mind racing. Lunari physiology is different from human, but the principles of allergic reaction should be similar. Antihistamines wouldn't work, their biochemistry was too different, but he had epinephrine, corticosteroids, and his field surgery kit. "Lyra, I need you to tell me everything you know about that medication. Chemical composition, delivery method, dosage, anything." Over the next 30 minutes, David worked with intense focus, using what Lyra knew about Lunari medicine and his own medical knowledge to create a treatment protocol. It was improvisation at its most desperate, mixing human medications in ratios that should theoretically work with Kira's alien biochemistry. He administered the first injection, and they waited. Kira's convulsions continued, her skin's color worsened. "Come on," David muttered, preparing a second dose with slightly different ratios. "Come on, Kira, fight it." The second injection went in. More waiting. Lyra held her sister's hand, whispering in their musical Lunari language. David monitored vitals, adjusted dosages, kept working. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Kira's convulsions began to ease. Her skin's color slowly returned to its normal silver glow. Her breathing steadied. David sagged with relief, only then realizing he was drenched in sweat. "She's going to be okay, but we need to monitor her closely. If she has another episode, I might not be able to improvise a solution." Lyra looked at him with tears streaming down her glowing cheeks. "You saved her again. You took a chance with medicines you didn't fully understand, risking making it worse, but you tried anyway." "It's what I do," David said simply. Kira's eyes fluttered open. She was weak but conscious. "David," she whispered, "I heard you telling me to fight." She reached out with a trembling hand and touched his face. "I fought for you." Something broke inside David at those words. These two women, alien, royalty, caught in a nightmare not of their making, had somehow decided he was worth fighting for, worth bonding with, worth trusting with their lives and their futures. He looked at Lyra, then at Kira, and saw not aliens or princesses or political complications. He saw two people who had been through hell and somehow still had the capacity for hope, for trust, for love. "The Kelsha bond," he said slowly. "What would it actually mean? What would I be agreeing to?" Lyra's eyes widened with hope. "It means we face everything together. Your burdens become ours. Our burdens become yours. We protect each other, support each other, build a life together. On Lunari, it is the deepest commitment one can make." "And if I'm not Lunari, if I'm just a broken down human who lives in a cabin to avoid the world?" "Then you're perfect," Kira said with a weak smile, "because we're just broken down Lunari who've forgotten how to trust the universe. Maybe we can fix each other." David sat back, looking at both of them. Outside, the storm was finally dying down, which meant their enemies would be coming soon. He could send the sisters away, try to hide them somewhere else, keep his distance emotionally. Or he could do what his heart was telling him to do, what it had been telling him since he pulled two freezing aliens from the snow and decided they mattered. "Okay," he said quietly, "tell me about this bonding ceremony." The joy that lit up both sisters' faces was brighter than any luminescence their skin could produce. And for the first time in 4 years, David felt something he thought was dead forever: hope.